The Haven Spire did not look like a home. It looked like the skeletal remains of a leviathan that had died choking on an asteroid belt, its bones fossilized into dark metal and reinforced with shielding arrays that hummed at a frequency just low enough to make a human's teeth ache. It was a fortress of necessity, a congregation point for the desperate and the defiant drifting in the void, where the light of the central stars grew thin. For Eddie, it was Tuesday, or at least what passed for Tuesday in a station that operated on a 26-hour cycle. Eddie sat on a crate in Sector 4's loading bay, double-checking the seal on a crate of medical supplies. He was a human, a species that the galactic community generally regarded as squishy, unpleasantly moist, and bafflingly stubborn. He was of average height for his kind, with messy hair that defied regulation cuts and eyes that always seemed to be looking for the punchline of a joke nobody else had heard. 112 biostabilizers, Eddie muttered to himself, running his thumb down the datapad. 50 rolls of compression bandages, and 3 containers of whatever this goop is that the Stonekin eat for breakfast. He tapped the screen, satisfying the inventory log. Eddie was a field medic and amphibious rescue specialist. In a station full of species that could regenerate limbs, possess natural armor, or phase through solid matter, his job often felt like trying to fix a hyperdrive with a roll of duct tape. Yet, he was good at it. His hands, though lacking claws or hardened scales, were steady. He could find a vein in a convulsing patient while explosions rocked the floor beneath him. He stood up, stretching his back until it popped. He was here to learn. That was what he told himself. He was here to figure out where humanity fit in a war against the hollow spawn creatures of void and hunger that defied physics and logic. But mostly, he was here because the pay was decent, and he had nowhere else to be. The heavy hydraulic doors at the far end of the bay hissed open. The air pressure shifted, carrying the scent of cold ozone and something muskier like pine and iron. A hush fell over the stevedores and mechanics working in the bay. Even the massive rock-skinned Stonekin paused in their lifting. Walking through the doors was a figure that commanded silence. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her posture rigid, with an aristocratic grace that made the industrial grime of the bay look offensive by proximity. She wore polished silver armor, articulated plates, sliding over one another with the smoothness of water. The chest plate bore an etching of a howling wolf head, stylized and sharp, the sigil of the House of the Silver Howl. She was Luparian, a wolf noble. Her fur was a stark, wintry white, contrasting with the dark undersuit beneath her armor. Her face was lupine, with high cheekbones and a muzzle that held a permanent stoic expression. Her eyes were gold-bright and piercing, scanning the room not with curiosity, but with a tactical assessment. Eddie, being Eddie, decided this was the perfect moment to be polite. He had been reading up on interspecies etiquette, trying to be less of a clumsy earthling. He remembered seeing a high-ranking Thalorian greet a dignitary the day before a gesture, involving a sharp tap to the chest, followed by an open palm extension. He stepped forward as she passed his crate. "Welcome to Sector 4, Eddie said, puffing out his chest. He tapped his sternum and thrust his hand out, fingers splayed. The Luparian stopped. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. The silence in the bay stretched thin, threatening to snap. Her ears, tufted with white fur, twitched once. "Human," she said. Her voice was a low contralto vibrating with a growl that she kept strictly controlled. "Unless you intend to challenge me for leadership of my pack by offering me your throat, I suggest you lower your hand." Eddie froze. He blinked. "Throat, no. No throat offering here. Just saying hello." He slowly retracted his hand, fighting the urge to hide it behind his back. "I saw a Thalorian do it. I thought it was universal for good greetings." "For a Thalorian, it signifies sharing breath," she corrected him, her tone dry and devoid of warmth. "For a Luparian, an open hand at that angle signifies a challenge to combat, usually to the death. You are fortunate I am not easily provoked by creatures that lack natural weaponry." Right, Eddie said, a nervous laugh escaping him. No natural weapons. Just sarcasm and opposable thumbs. I'm Eddie, by the way. Medic. She stared at him for a second longer, then was comfortable. I am Mabel, of House Silver Howl. Mabel, Eddie repeated. It was a surprisingly soft name for a 7-foot armored wolf warrior. Nice to meet you, Mabel. I'll make a note, no hand gestures, just nodding. Nodding is safe, right? Nodding is acceptable, Mabel said. She adjusted the pauldrons of her armor, the silver gleaming under the harsh bay lights. Do not let me interrupt your inventory of goop. With that, she turned and swept past him, her heavy boots making rhythmic thuds against the deck plating. The other workers exhaled the tension, draining from the room. Eddie watched her go. She seems nice, he whispered to a nearby maintenance drone. Terrifying, but nice. The mess hall of Haven Spire was a chaotic symphony of chewing, slurping, and clattering trays. It was the only place where the hierarchy of military rank dissolved, slightly replaced by the universal hierarchy of who got to the fresh protein synthesizer first. Eddie sat alone at a corner table, nursing a bowl of nutrient stew that looked gray and tasted like disappointment. He had been on the Spire for 3 months, and while he was friendly, he hadn't truly found a group yet. The Stonekin were too quiet, the Thalorians too telepathic, and the humans were scattered across different shifts. He watched the room. At a long table near the center, Mabel sat with 2 others. One was a massive Stonekin named Roken, whose skin looked like granite boulders cemented together. The other was a lithe Thalorian named Seren, who had violet skin and eyes that seemed to see through walls. They were an elite unit, clearly. Mabel ate with precision, tearing strips of dried meat with sharp teeth, her movements economical. Eddie stood up to recycle his tray. As he passed their table, the artificial gravity generator in the floor gave a characteristic hiccup, a known glitch in Sector 7 that maintenance had promised to fix for 2 weeks. The floor lurched. Eddie stumbled. His tray containing a half-eaten apple and a cup of water went flying. He flailed, managing to catch the cup but fumbling the apple. It bounced off the edge of the table and rolled directly toward Mabel. She stopped mid-chew. Her golden eyes tracked the apple as it spun to a halt in front of her armored gauntlet. The entire mess hall seemed to pause. Spilling food near a Luparian noble was probably another capital offense in some book Eddie hadn't read yet. I am so sorry, Eddie said, straightening up and brushing imaginary dust off his uniform. Gravity glitch. It has a personal vendetta against me. I think I owe it money. Mabel looked at the apple, then up at Eddie. The irritation in her eyes was there, but it was tempered by something else. Exhaustion. Boredom. Gravity affects all mass equally humans, she said. It does not have creditors. You haven't met my luck, Eddie replied, trying to keep his tone light. It defies physics. Mabel picked up the apple. Her claws were long, sharp enough to eviscerate, but she held the soft fruit without bruising it. She set it aside on her tray. Then she reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out a strip of dark, fibrous meat. It smelled intense, smoky rich, and slightly metallic. She held it out to him. Exchange, she said simply. Eddie stared at the meat. He knew what that was. He had read about it in the xenobiology briefing. Kavra honor jerky. Luparians only shared food from their personal stores with members of their own pack. It was a sign of acceptance, of bringing someone into the circle of trust. Wait, Eddie said, his eyebrows shooting up. Are you adopting me? Am I in the high society wolf club now? The Stonekin Roken let out a sound like grinding gravel, a laugh. Seren the Thalorian smiled faintly. Mabel's expression did not change, but her whiskers twitched again. Do not be absurd. You lack the requisite fur density, and your sense of smell is pathetic. Consider this compensation for the gravity. Right. Compensation, Eddie said. He took the meat. It was warm from being close to her armor. Thanks, I'll try not to trip over air next time. See that you do, Mabel said, turning back to her meal. You are fragile. It would be inconvenient if you broke. Eddie walked away, chewing on the tough, salty meat. It tasted better than anything the synthesizers had produced in a month. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, and for the first time since arriving on the Spire, the gray metal walls felt a little less oppressive. He didn't know the weight of what she had just done. He didn't know that Mabel, the exile of House Silver Howl, had not shared food with anyone outside her unit in 10 years. He didn't know she was watching his back as he walked away, her golden eyes clouded with a conflict he couldn't see. The training simulation was supposed to be routine. Level 4 intensity. Standard capture and hold objective. The simulation deck was a massive hangar, equipped with hard light projectors and kinetic feedback fields. Eddie was assigned as the support medic for a mixed squad, comprising Mabel Roken, a few other veterans, and a handful of new recruits. Stay low, keep your heads down, and check your corners. Mabel's voice cut through the comms channel, crisp and authoritative. She moved through the holographic ruins of an ancient city with terrifying speed, her silver armor acting as a beacon for the team. Eddie jogged at the rear, keeping an eye on a young Thalorian recruit who looked like he was about to hyperventilate. Breathe, kid, Eddie whispered. It's just angry light bulbs. They can't actually kill you. They can break ribs, the recruit stammered. That's why I'm here. Eddie patted his medical kit. I fix ribs. I'm great at ribs. Suddenly, the air in the simulation deck shifted. The hum of the projectors deepened into a snarl. The holographic enemies simulated hollow spawn flickered. Their forms, usually translucent, orange, turned a jagged static-filled black. System error, Rokan's voice rumbled over the comms. Energy spike in the projectors. Abort, Mabel ordered instantly. End simulation, computer freeze program. The computer did not respond. From the center of the ruins, a massive construct materialized. It wasn't a standard training dummy. It was a corrupted amalgamation of code and hard light energy towering 12 feet tall, with multiple limbs, ending in rotating blades. It let out a screech that wasn't digital. It sounded like tearing metal. Defensive formation, Mabel roared. She drew a massive energy glaive from her back, the blade igniting with a sapphire hum. The construct lunged. It didn't go for the veterans. It went for the weakest link. It targeted the young Thalorian recruit next to Eddie. The kid froze. Fear locked his limbs. Move, Eddie shouted, but he knew the kid wasn't going to make it. Eddie didn't have a weapon. He had a stun baton and a bag of bandages. He wasn't a soldier. He was a medic. But he saw the trajectory of the construct's bladed limb, and he saw the frozen kid, and his body moved before his brain could file a protest. He didn't run at the monster. He tackled the kid. Eddie slammed into the recruit, sending them both skidding across the floor just as the construct's limb smashed into the ground where they had been standing. The impact shattered the holographic concrete, sending shards of hard light flying like shrapnel. Roken, suppress it, Mabel shouted. Eddie scrambled to his feet, grabbing the recruit by the harness. Go, get to the exit. He shoved the kid toward the safety doors. The construct swiveled. Its sensory array locked onto Eddie. Oh, come on, Eddie muttered. Pick on someone your own size. The construct raised a second limb, this one charging with a ball of unstable plasma energy. Eddie raised his arm, shielding his face, bracing for an impact that would definitely do more than break ribs. A silver blur interposed itself between him and the death machine. Mabel slid into position, planting her boots. She didn't dodge. She raised her shield generator and braced her glaive. Hold! She snarled. The plasma bolt struck Mabel. The explosion was blinding. The shockwave lifted Eddie off his feet. He felt like he had been hit by a freight train. He flew backward, the air punched out of his lungs. His back collided with a structural support pillar, with a sickening crunch. He hit the floor, his vision swimming. A high-pitched whine drilled into his ears. He tried to breathe, but his chest felt like it was encased in concrete. He could see the battle continuing, Rokan smashing the construct with his stone fists, Seren dismantling it with psionic blasts, but it looked like a silent movie. Eddie looked down at his chest. His biomonitor was flashing red. Arrhythmia. Cardiac distress. Not good, he wheezed. He fumbled for his biostabilizer, a small device meant to regulate heartbeats in trauma victims. His fingers were numb. He couldn't grip it. Through the haze, he saw Mabel. She was standing where the explosion had happened. Her armor was scorched black on the left side. She was looking at him. Not at the enemy. At him. She dropped her glaive. Eddie's vision tunneled. The edges turned black. He felt cold. Then there was a presence beside him. He couldn't see clearly, but he could smell it. The scent of ozone from the blast, and beneath it, the smell of hot silver and singing fur. Human, a voice said. It sounded far away, distorted by water. Eddie, stay. He felt a hand large clawed armored press against his chest. It was heavy. It felt like an anchor. Stubborn, he managed to whisper. I'm stubborn. Then the darkness swallowed him whole. Mabel stood alone in the armory of the House of the Silver Howl, a private enclave within the Spire, allocated to her lineage. The room was dark, lit only by the glowing embers of the ceremonial forge. She had dismissed the medical drones. She had dismissed Rokan and Seren. She needed to be alone. Her armor lay on the workbench, specifically the chest plate. She ran a clawed finger over the scorched metal on the left side. The plasma blast had been hot enough to warp the alloy, but it hadn't penetrated. Luparian steel was forged in the hearts of dying stars. It endured. But she was shaking. She looked at her hand. It was trembling, a fine tremor that she couldn't suppress. When she had seen the human, Eddie fly backward, when she had seen him crumpled against that pillar, something ancient and terrible had clawed at the inside of her chest. It was the same icy grip that had taken her grandfather, the same fear that had driven her ancestor, the first Herofang, to make a pact with the Hollow Maw to save her dying mate. Loss. The absolute crushing terror of loss. He is just a human, she whispered to the empty room. He is frail. He lives for 80 years if he is lucky. He is a blink of an eye. But he had jumped. He had no armor, no natural weapons, no shields. He had jumped in front of a construct that tore steel like paper, just to save a recruit he didn't know. He had the heart of a wolf trapped in the body of a prey animal. Mabel closed her eyes. She could still feel the phantom sensation of his erratic heartbeat under her palm when she checked him in the simulation deck. It had been fluttering like a trapped bird. She could not let him fade. She could not let the void take him. Not him. She made a decision. It was irrational. It was forbidden by the new laws of her house, which forbade forming attachments that could lead to the obsession. But the blood of her ancestors sang in her veins, demanding action. Mabel activated the forge. A concentrated beam of plasma heat ignited, glowing a furious blue-white. She took the chest plate. She turned it over, exposing the inner lining, the side that rested directly against her fur, against her own heart. She picked up a stylus made of void glass. She held the breastplate over the heat. The metal began to glow, turning a dull cherry red. The heat radiated into her face, drying her eyes, singing the tips of her whiskers. She pressed the stylus to the hot metal. Smoke curled up. The smell of burning lacquer and ozone filled the small room. With painstaking precision, she began to carve. Not in the common tongue, but in high Luparian script. The symbols were angular, sharp like teeth. E-D-D-I-E. She branded his name directly into the metal that covered her heart. In the traditions of the old houses, this was the soul anchor. To carve a name inward was to bind that life to your own. It was a vow. As long as this armor holds your heartbeats with mine, I carry you against my skin. It was possessive. It was desperate. It was a spell of protection woven from grief and stubbornness. She finished the last stroke. The metal cooled the letters standing out as dark charred scars against the silver. Mabel traced the name with her thumb. The heat seared her skin, but she welcomed the pain. It grounded her. "You do not get to die," she hissed softly. "I forbid it." She waited for the metal to cool completely. Then she strapped the armor back on. The cold weight settled on her shoulders. Inside, against her chest, the raised letters of his name pressed into her fur, a secret irritation, a constant reminder. She took a breath, composed her face into a mask of noble indifference, and walked out of the armory. The medical bay smelled of antiseptic and lemon. It was an odd combination that Eddie always found unsettling. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was white, standard. "Welcome back to the land of the conscious," a voice said. Eddie turned his head. His neck was stiff. Dr. Vallis stood by the bio-bed. She was a human, older, with graying hair tied back in a severe bun. She was reading a datapad. "Doctor," Eddie croaked, "did I win?" "You successfully used your body as a projectile to save a recruit," Dr. Vallis said without looking up. "The recruit is fine. You, however, suffered a severe cardiac event. Your heart stopped for 12 seconds. Eddie blinked. 12. That's a personal best. "It's not a sport, Eddie," Vallis sighed. "The impact disrupted your rhythm. But here is the strange thing. Your heart stabilized before we even got the defibrillator on you. It just kicked back in. Stronger than before. Like it was being paced by an external source." Eddie frowned. He rubbed his chest. It felt sore but whole. "Maybe I'm just too stubborn to die." "Maybe," Vallis said. She tapped the screen. "You are cleared for light duty. But try not to tackle any more hard light constructs for at least 48 hours. "No promises." Eddie sat up. As he swung his legs over the side of the bed, he saw her. Mabel was standing by the door. She was fully armored, her helmet tucked under one arm. She looked pristine, as if she hadn't been blasted by plasma 3 hours ago. "You're awake," she said. Her voice was flat. "Alive and kicking," Eddie said. He tried to flash a grin, but it came out a bit crooked. "Thanks for the save. I remember seeing a silver blur before the lights went out." Mabel walked toward the bed. She moved with a stiffness that wasn't there before. She stopped 2 feet away. "You acted foolishly," she said. "You have no shielding. You are soft biological matter. Interposing yourself between a construct and a target is statistically suicidal." The kid froze. Eddie shrugged. "I didn't think so. I just moved." Mabel looked at him. Her gaze dropped to his chest for a fraction of a second, then snapped back to his eyes. "Instinct," she murmured. "Pack instinct." "I guess," Eddie said. "So am I fired?" "No," Mabel said. She shifted her weight. "I have filed a request to have you permanently assigned to my squad. Unit Alpha 9. Eddie's jaw dropped. "What? Why, I'm a liability. You just said so." "You are fragile," Mabel corrected. "But you are useful. Your hands are steady. And you have the survival instincts of a cornered badger. I require a medic who does not freeze." She turned slightly, hiding the left side of her chest from his view, though he couldn't see the brand beneath the armor anyway. "Get dressed," she ordered. "We have been summoned to the command deck. The sensors have picked up anomalous readings in the outer sector. The hollow maw is stirring." Eddie hopped off the bed, grabbing his shirt. "Anomalous readings. Sounds fun." He paused, looking at her back. "Hey, Mabel." She didn't turn. "Didn't." "What? Thanks," he said softly. "For whatever you did. I feel like you pulled me back." Mabel's shoulders tensed. The name Eddie carved into the metal, pressing against her heart, seemed to burn hot for a second. "Do not be sentimental, human," she said, her voice tight. "It is inefficient." She marched out of the room. Eddie watched her go, pulling his shirt over his head. He felt a strange rhythm in his chest, a double beat like an echo. Thump, thump, thump. He shook his head, dismissing it as a side effect of the meds. He grabbed his boots. There was work to do. The Spire was calling, and for the first time he felt like he had a pack to run with. The shuttle, a battered utility craft named the Rusty Needle, shuddered as it decelerated out of the supercruise lane. Through the reinforced viewport, the objective came into focus. It was not a planet, nor was it a station in the traditional sense. It was a ruin, suspended in the crushing silence of the void, a fragment of a temple that had likely existed before humanity had figured out how to sharpen sticks. Eddie sat strapped into the crash seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the safety harness. He looked across the small cabin at his new team. Rokan the Stonekin looked like a boulder contemplating philosophy. His eyes closed his massive chest, rising and falling with the slow rhythm of tectonic plates. Seren the Thalorian was meditating, a faint violet aura shimmering around her head. And then there was Mabel. She sat perfectly still, her silver armor gleaming even in the dim emergency lighting of the shuttle. She was checking the energy charge on her glaive, her golden eyes narrowed in concentration. She looked less like a soldier and more like a statue carved from moonlight and violence. Approaching the debris field, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. 2 minutes to hard dock. Brace for turbulence. Eddie swallowed hard. Turbulence in a vacuum. My favorite kind of physics violation. Mabel looked up, her ears swiveling toward him. It is not a violation of physics, human. It is the gravitational displacement caused by the mass of the temple interacting with the shuttle's thrusters. Do you ever stop vibrating? I am not vibrating, Eddie defended, though his leg was bouncing up and down at a speed that could probably power a small generator. I am revving up. It is a tactical warm-up. It is annoying, Mabel said, but there was no bite in her voice. She reached out with the haft of her glaive and tapped his knee effectively, pinning his leg to the floor. Conserve your energy. You will need it. This structure is designated as a temple of the Heartforge. The gravity inside will be erratic. Right, Eddie said. He looked at her chest plate where the intricate wolf design swirled. He knew theoretically that it was a sacred piece of heraldry. To him, however, it looked oddly cozy for battle gear. You know, Eddie said, unable to help himself. I have been thinking about your armor. The way the neck guard comes up and hoods over the helmet, it is basically just a high-end metal hoodie. Rokan opened one rocky eye. Seren suppressed a smile. Mabel stared at him. Her expression was one of profound suffering. A hoodie, she repeated. You compare the vestments of the silver howl forged in the neutron fires of the Lupus Nebula, worn by 40 generations of my ancestors, to a piece of casual human textile. I mean functionality-wise, Eddie grinned, feeling brave. It keeps your head warm. It looks cool. It says, do not talk to me, I am brooding. It is a hoodie. A very expensive, very sharp hoodie. It is not for warmth, Mabel said, her voice rising half an octave. It is to deflect plasma rounds from the jugular vein. And I do not brood. I contemplate tactical variables. Sure, Eddie nodded. Tactical brooding. Whatever you say, your wolfness. Mabel let out a huff that sounded suspiciously like a growl of amusement, though she turned her head away to hide it. You are lucky you are useful, Eddie. Otherwise, I would leave you in the airlock. Love you too, boss, Eddie muttered. The shuttle slammed into the docking clamps with a deafening clang. The fastened seatbelt light turned off. Showtime, Rokan rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. The interior of the temple was cold. It was a cold that bit through thermal suits, a chill that felt less like temperature and more like the absence of life. The corridors were vast, built for beings twice the height of a human, with vaulted ceilings, lost in shadow. The walls were covered in carvings, scenes of wolves battling formless shadows of stars, dying and being reborn. Eddie walked in the center of the formation, his medkit heavy on his back. Mabel took point, her glaive illuminating the path with a pale blue light. Rokan covered the rear, while Seren walked beside Eddie, her senses extended to scan for psychic imprints. "This place is old," Eddie whispered. The sound of his own voice startled him. The acoustics were strange, swallowing sound, rather than echoing it. "Older than Haven Spire." "It dates back to the first expansion," Seren said softly. Her voice was melodic, carrying a calm that settled Eddie's nerves. "Before the Luparian houses fractured. Before the Hollow Maw was fully awake." They reached a massive atrium. In the center floated chunks of debris defying gravity, drifting in lazy circles. "Hold," Mabel ordered. She held up a fist. "Movement at 12 o'clock. Shadows." Eddie squinted. He saw nothing but darkness, but he trusted Mabel's eyes. "Hollow constructs?" Rokan asked, unlimbering a heavy rotary cannon. "No," Mabel said, lowering her weapon slightly. "Just echoes. Residual energy. The temple remembers its ghosts." She signaled for them to move forward. They navigated through the floating debris, using magnetic grapples to pull themselves across gaps where the floor had crumbled away into the void. After an hour of traversing the treacherous terrain, they called a halt in a smaller antechamber that seemed structurally stable. Rokan set up a perimeter sensor. Mabel moved to the far wall, inspecting a series of runes. Eddie sat down on a fallen pillar, wiping sweat from his forehead. Despite the cold, the exertion of moving and shifting gravity was exhausting. Seren sat down nearby, crossing her legs. She looked at him with those violet eyes that seemed to peel back layers of defense. "You are afraid," Seren stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, like noting the color of the sky. "I am in a haunted space temple floating in the middle of nowhere," Eddie retorted, opening his water canteen. "Fear is the appropriate evolutionary response. It keeps me from petting the space wolves." "It is not the temple you fear," Seren said. "It is your own inadequacy." Eddie paused the canteen halfway to his mouth. He lowered it slowly. He looked at Mabel, who was too far away to hear them, her back turned, as she traced the ancient carvings. "Get out of my head, Seren," Eddie muttered, but there was no heat in it. "I do not need telepathy to see it," Seren said gently. "You throw yourself into danger with a recklessness that suggests you do not value your own survival. You act as though you are disposable." Eddie stared at his boots. The jovial mask slipped, revealing a tired man who had seen too much. "I was on a colony transport 3 years ago," Eddie said quietly. "Before Haven Spire. We were hit by pirates. The hull breached. I was part of the emergency response team. There was a beam, a support beam that had collapsed on a young engineer. Her name was Sarah." He took a breath, the air in the temple tasting of dust and ozone. "I tried to lift it. I tried everything. Levers, hydraulics, my own back. I just couldn't. I wasn't strong enough. A Stonekin could have lifted it with one hand. A Luparian could have cut through it. But I was just a human. I held her hand while the air ran out." He looked up at Seren, his eyes hard. "That is why I am here. That is why I push. Because I am sick of being the weak one. I am sick of not being able to save people because my biology isn't good enough. So if I have to be the meat shield, if I have to break my own bones to buy a few seconds for someone like Mabel or Rokan to do the heavy lifting, then that is a fair trade. My life for someone who can actually make a difference." Seren placed a slender violet hand on his shoulder. "Strength is not just torque and tensile durability, Eddie. You carry a burden heavy enough to crush a Stonekin, yet you still stand. Do not undervalue the strength of endurance." Before Eddie could respond, Mabel's voice cut through the quiet. "I have found it," she called out. "The entrance to the inner sanctum." Eddie shook off the mood, plastering his grin back on. "Coming, boss. Try not to start the looting without me." The inner sanctum was a spherical chamber, lined with a metal that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light like a heartbeat. In the center, suspended in a beam of pure energy, was a shard of crystal. It was jagged, glowing with an intense amber hue, a heart-forged sigil. Mabel approached it slowly, her posture radiating a mix of reverence and dread. "This is it," she said. "One of the anchors that keeps the hollow maw at bay." "It looks angry," Eddie noted, standing a few paces behind her. "It is grieving," Mabel corrected. She stopped looking at the sigil. Then she turned to the group. Her face, usually so composed, looked fractured. "My house," she began, her voice low. "The house of the Silver Howl. We were not always the pariahs of the Luparian court." She looked at the sigil, as if seeing a memory playing out in its reflection. 500 years ago, during the Great Siege, my ancestor Lord Varric stood where we stand now. The hollow maw was winning. The Spire was falling. He was faced with a choice: watch his pack die, or embrace a power that could stop the darkness. "He chose the power," Roken guessed, his voice somber. "He chose to let the maw in," Mabel said bitterly. "He believed he could control it. He merged his soul with the void to gain the strength to save his family. He succeeded. He slaughtered the enemy. But he did not stop. He became Herofang, the wolf of nothingness. He devoured the very pack he swore to save." She turned to Eddie. "That is why I am here, human. That is why I wear this armor. My blood is tainted. Every time I draw my weapon, I fear that I am one step closer to him. One step closer to becoming a monster." The silence that followed was heavy. Eddie looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the terror behind the golden eyes. She wasn't an ice queen. She was a woman walking on a tightrope over a pit of hell, terrified that one slip would damn everyone she loved. "You are not him," Eddie said firmly. "You cannot know that," Mabel snapped. "I can," Eddie said. He stepped forward, walking past her toward the sigil. "Because a monster wouldn't care. You care too much. That is your problem. You are so afraid of hurting people, you push them away." He reached out toward the amber crystal. "Let's get this thing packed up and go home." "Eddie, wait!" Seren shouted. "The energy resonance is unstable." It was too late. Eddie's gloved hand brushed the surface of the sigil. The world exploded into white. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but of memory. Eddie felt a hook sink into his navel and yank him backward through time. He was standing in a corridor of silver and glass. The sky outside was burning. He looked down at his hands. They were his hands, but scarred older. He wore armor that was crude, battered, painted with a blue stripe. Beside him stood a giant, a Luparian warrior. She wore armor of silver, but it was stained with soot and blood. Her helmet was off. It wasn't Mabel. The fur was gray, the muzzle scarred, but the golden eyes were exactly the same. "They are breaching the gate, Kale," the wolf warrior said. Her voice was rough, like grinding stones. "Let them come," the man Kale said. His voice was Eddie's, but deeper, filled with a weary resolve. "I am not moving Lyra. Not while you are bleeding." The wolf woman laughed, a wet hacking sound. She reached out and gripped his shoulder. "Stupid human. You are soft. You will break." "I break," Kale said, gripping her hand. "And then I heal. That is what we do. We buy you time." She looked at him with a desperate, ferocious love. She took a dagger and carved a symbol into her chest plate, right over her heart. "Then I carry you. Beyond the fire. Beyond the void. I carry you." The vision shattered. Eddie gasped, his body arching, as a jolt of pure kinetic energy threw him backward. He hit the stone floor hard. The air seized in his lungs. "Eddie!" He heard the voice. It wasn't Kyle's voice. It was Mabel's. He blinked. The ceiling of the ancient temple swam into view. His chest felt like it was on fire. Mabel was there, instantly dropping to her knees with a clang of armor. She ripped off her gauntlets, her bare hands covered in soft white fur and tipped with razor-sharp claws, pressing against his neck, checking for a pulse. "Breathe, you idiot," she hissed. "Breathe," Eddie sucked in a jagged breath. "Whoa," he wheezed. "That was a trip." "Do not speak," Mabel ordered. She looked frantic. Seren medkit now. I'm okay. Eddie tried to sit up, but Mabel pushed him back down. Her strength was immense, but her touch was surprisingly gentle. You stopped breathing for 4 seconds, she said, her eyes wide. You touched a raw, heart-forged sigil. Your nervous system should be ash. I have a high tolerance for static electricity, Eddie joked weakly. He looked at her. The image of the gray wolf warrior from the vision superimposed over her face for a second. Lyra, Kale. The names meant nothing to him, but the crushing weight of a promise made in blood lingered. I saw something, Eddie whispered. Hallucinations are common with neural shock, Mabel said dismissively, though her hands were shaking as she tore open a package of burn gel. Stay still. You have thermal burns on your chest. Mabel, let me do it, Rokan offered, stepping forward. No, Mabel snarled. She didn't look up. I will do it. Secure the sigil. That is an order. Rokan and Seren exchanged a look, then moved to the crystal. Mabel unzipped the front of Eddie's uniform, exposing his chest. The skin was red, angry, with a spiderweb pattern of lightning burns radiating from his sternum. She applied the cooling gel. Her claws, lethal enough to tear through tank armor, moved with surgical precision, spreading the salve without scratching him. You know, Eddie murmured, watching her work. You are getting very familiar with my chest. If I didn't know better, I would say you are obsessed with my heart. Mabel's hand froze. She looked at his chest, then at her own armored breastplate, where the secret brand lay hidden against her fur. Your heart is loud, she said softly. It is annoying. I am merely ensuring it continues to make noise, so I do not have to fill out the paperwork for a casualty. Is that all? Eddie asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Mabel looked him in the eyes. For a moment, the distance between them vanished. The noblewoman and the scavenger, the predator and the prey. No, she said. The word hung in the air, heavy and terrified. That is not all. She abruptly pulled her hand away, wiping the excess gel on a cloth. You are stabilized. Can you walk? Yeah, Eddie said, sitting up slowly. I can walk. He watched her as she stood up and turned away, adjusting her armor. She pressed her hand briefly against her chest, a gesture he had seen her do a dozen times. But now he wondered if she was checking for a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The extraction was tense. They had the sigil contained in a dampening field generator carried by Rokan, but the atmosphere had shifted. They sat in the cargo hold of the shuttle as it blasted away from the temple. The hum of the engines was the only sound for a long time. Eddie dug into his pocket and pulled out a crinkled wrapper, a chocolate bar. Genuine Earth chocolate, or at least a very convincing synthetic replica he had bartered 3 shifts of latrine duty for. He nudged Mabel's boot with his own. She looked down, then at him. He held out the chocolate. Sugar, she said, wrinkling her nose. Empty calories. No nutritional value for a combat scenario. It releases endorphins, Eddie said. Makes the brain happy. And you look like you need a happy brain right now. Mabel stared at the chocolate. Then she took it. She unwrapped it with the same delicate precision she used for everything. She broke off a piece and put it in her mouth. She chewed thoughtfully. Her expression remained stoic. Well, Eddie asked. It is excessively sweet, she said. The texture is cloying. I knew you would hate it, Eddie sighed. Give it back. I did not say I would not finish it, Mabel said, moving the bar out of his reach. I must analyze it further, to understand the human weakness for such things. She ate another piece, and another. Eddie smiled, leaning his head back against the bulkhead. You are welcome. Across the hold, Seren suddenly gasped. Her violet eyes flew open, the pupils dilating, until her eyes were almost entirely black. Seren, Rokan asked, his voice rumbling with concern. He is here, Seren whispered. Her voice trembled. I feel the cold, like a blade of ice sliding through the void. Who? Mabel demanded, dropping the rest of the chocolate wrapper. Her demeanor shifted instantly from companion to commander. The wolf, Seren said. Herofang. He was at the temple. Or his shadow was. He is tracking the sigils. He knows we took one. Mabel went rigid. He is hunting. Not just hunting, Seren said, looking at Eddie. He is gathering. He is feeding. The connection is getting stronger. He intends to breach the spire. Eddie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Breach the spire. You mean an invasion? I mean an extinction event, Seren said. Mabel stood up, pacing the small confines of the shuttle. Her claws clicked on the metal deck. He wants to finish what he started 500 years ago, she growled. He wants to prove that everything eventually falls to the void. She stopped and looked at Eddie. I should never have brought you into this. This is my house's curse. You are just a bystander. I am not a bystander, Eddie said, standing up to face her. The ship hit a pocket of turbulence, but he kept his balance. I am part of the pack. You said it yourself. You do not leave the pack behind. You will die, Mabel said, her voice cracking. If you face him, you will die. You are soft, Eddie. You are so terrifyingly soft. Then I guess you better make sure you are standing in front of me, Eddie said. Because I am not going anywhere. Mabel looked at him, frustration and something fiercely affectionate warring in her face. She wanted to grab him and shake him. She wanted to lock him in a stasis pod and launch him to the safest planet in the galaxy. But she knew with a sinking feeling that he wouldn't go. Stubborn, she whispered. Foolish, stubborn human. That is my brand, Eddie grinned. The return to Haven Spire was not a victory lap. As the rusty needle dropped out of Super Cruise near the fortress, the comms board lit up like a Christmas tree. Warning! Proximity alert. Sector 9, Sector 12, Sector 1. The automated voice was calm, which made the message more terrifying. Hollow spawn signatures detected. Numbers uncountable. Eddie rushed to the viewport. Below them, Haven Spire rotated slowly against the backdrop of stars. But the stars were being blotted out. Great streaks of darkness like ink spilled in water were rushing toward the station. They were hollow spawn creatures that looked like tears, in reality, shifting and jagged. And leading them, visible even from this distance as a point of absolute light-drinking blackness, was a massive ship that looked like a severed wolf's head. The Fang of Ruin, Mabel whispered, standing beside him. His flagship. He beat us back, Roken said grimly. No, Mabel said. She reached out and gripped the railing of the console, the metal groaning under her grip. He waited for us. He wanted us to bring the sigil to him. She turned to the team. Her eyes were burning gold. Prepare for combat drop, she ordered. We do not dock. We breach. We get to the command center before he does. Eddie grabbed his medkit. His hands were shaking just a little. He looked at Mabel. Hey, he said. She looked at him. High-end metal hoodie, he said. Don't forget to put the hood up. Mabel stared at him for a second. Then the corner of her mouth twitched upward, a micro smile. Load your weapon, Eddie, she said softly, and stay behind me. The shuttle engines roared, diving toward the besieged fortress. The war had arrived, and for the first time in his life, Eddie wasn't looking for a way out. He was looking for a way to keep the Silver Wolf alive, even if it cost him his heart a second time. The airlock of Sector 4 did not open. It disintegrated. The rusty needle had not so much docked as it had collided with the receiving clamps, tearing a jagged wound in the side of Haven Spire. The moment the ramp dropped, the noise of the invasion rushed in a cacophony of screaming metal klaxons, blaring in discordant rhythm, and the terrifying, wet, tearing sound of reality being unmade. Move, move, move! Mabel roared, her voice amplified by her helmet's external speakers. She leaped from the ramp, her silver glaive igniting with a hum that cut through the chaos. Eddie scrambled after her, his medical kit bouncing against his spine. The scene that greeted them was a nightmare rendered in high definition. The usually orderly docking bay was a slaughterhouse of physics. The air shimmered with oily black rifts, portals to the void, from which the hollow spawn poured. They were not flesh and blood. They were jagged geometry, and hunger creatures made of static, and teeth that flickered in and out of existence. "They are trying to cut off the lifts," Roken shouted, his rotary cannon spinning up with a sound like a chainsaw tearing through bedrock. "They want to isolate the core." "Then we carve a path," Mabel commanded. "Formation Alpha 6, Rokan suppression, Seren barrier. Eddie, stay in my shadow." "Your shadow is currently moving at 60 miles per hour, Eddie yelled back, ducking as a beam of void energy vaporized a crate of ammunition beside him. "But I am right behind you." They moved as a single organism. Rokan took the lead, his stone hide deflecting the smaller energy bolts, while his cannon turned the first wave of spawn into dissolving mist. Seren moved with fluid grace, her hands weaving violet barriers that caught the heavier ordnance, redirecting it back at the attackers. But it was Eddie and Mabel who drew the eye. As they pushed into the maintenance corridor that led toward the Heartforge core, the fighting became close quarters. A spawn resembling a centipede made of black glass lunged from a vent in the ceiling, aiming for Eddie's unprotected neck. Before Eddie could even flinch, Mabel spun. She didn't look. She simply drove the butt of her glaive backward, crushing the creature's carapace against the wall. In the same motion, she sidestepped a plasma bolt that would have taken her head off. Eddie didn't freeze. As Mabel engaged two more constructs, he saw a Thalorian guard slumped against a bulkhead, bleeding from a jagged wound in the shoulder. Eddie slid across the floor, literally sliding on the slick coolant, leaking from a pipe, and reached the guard. "Don't die on me today," Eddie grunted, slapping a biopatch onto the wound and injecting a coagulant stimulant. "It is bad for the paperwork." "Behind you," the guard gasped. Eddie didn't look. He dropped flat. A silver blade whistled over his head, decapitating the spawn that had been creeping up on him. It was Mabel. She had thrown her secondary dagger with pinpoint accuracy while fighting 3 other enemies. "Up, Eddie!" she barked. He scrambled up, grabbed the wounded guard and shoved him toward a secure bulkhead. "Go medbay is locked down. Head for the secondary triage in Sector 8. He spun back to Mabel, just as she was forced back by a massive, brute-like spawn. She stumbled. Eddie fired his stun baton's grappling hook, snagging a loose conduit above the spawn, and yanked. The conduit snapped, dumping high-pressure steam onto the creature. It shrieked distracted for the 1 second Mabel needed to drive her glaive through its core. They regrouped at the blast doors of the central lift. Roken looked at the two of them, Eddie panting, wiping coolant from his face, and Mabel, her armor splattered with void ichor, standing protectively over him. "I have served with bonding pairs who spent 20 years syncing their neural patterns," Roken rumbled, reloading his cannon. "You two have been a team for 3 weeks. How are you doing that?" "Doing what?" Eddie asked, checking the charge on his biostabilizer. "Moving without talking," Seren noted, her eyes glowing faintly. "Your thoughts are not connected, yet your intent is identical. It is unusual." "It is survival," Mabel said sharply, though she reached out and briefly touched Eddie's shoulder a check to make sure he was solid. "The lift is dead. We take the maintenance ladder. It is 40 floors down to the core." 40 floors? Eddie groaned. "If the void monsters don't kill me, the cardio will." "I will carry you if your legs fail," Mabel said, and she wasn't joking. "Not necessary," Eddie adjusted his straps. "I am powered by pure terror and caffeine. Let's go." The descent was a blur of darkness and adrenaline, but the arrival at the Heartforge core was a moment of sheer, terrifying awe. The core was the heart of Haven Spire, a cavernous spherical chamber miles across located at the very center of the fortress. In the middle of the chamber, suspended by massive gravity tethers, was the Heartforge itself, a miniature star contained within a cage of ancient Luparian steel. It pulsed with a rhythmic golden light that usually kept the shields of the station alive. Now, that light was flickering. Shadows were bleeding into the chamber. The air tasted metallic and wrong. And standing on the catwalk that led to the central control mechanism was a figure that looked like a dark reflection of Mabel. It was Herofang. He was huge, towering over even Roken. His armor was ancient, a twisted parody of the House of the Silver Howl's design. Where Mabel's armor was polished silver, his was pitted black iron, weeping a dark fog that evaporated before it hit the ground. His helmet was gone, revealing a wolf's head, stripped of fur, the flesh gray, and necrotic eyes, burning with two empty purple voids. He held a massive greatsword that seemed to drink the light around it. "The seal weakens," Herofang's voice boomed. It didn't sound like it came from a throat. It sounded like tectonic plates grinding together. "The Spire remembers its master." Mabel froze. She stood at the entrance of the catwalk, her glaive trembling in her grip. This was the monster she had been raised to fear. This was the shame of her bloodline made flesh. "Grandfather," she whispered the word, slipping out like a curse. Herofang turned, the empty sockets fixed on her. "Granddaughter," he rasped. "You wear the silver. You wear the lie." "I wear the honor you abandoned," Mabel shouted, though her voice lacked its usual steel. "Honor?" Herofang laughed, a sound that made Eddie's teeth ache. "There is no honor in dying for the weak. Look at them." He gestured with his sword toward Eddie Roken and Seren. "Fragile things. Dust in the wind. I sought eternity. I sought to make our house immortal, and you play nursemaid to cattle." "They are my pack," Mabel stepped forward, but her step faltered. "They are chains," Herofang hissed. "Do you not feel it? The fear you look at them and you see their death. You see their bones breaking. You know that to love them is to invite pain. I can take that pain away, child. I can hollow you out, make you pure, make you unbreaking." The words hit Mabel like physical blows. She lowered her glaive. Her ears flattened against her skull. The void energy radiating from Herofang seemed to seep into her, whispering to the darkest parts of her mind, the parts that were terrified of loss, the parts that did believe she was destined to fail. Mabel stammered. "I am the Silver Howl. You are a frightened puppy barking at the storm." Herofang stepped closer, the darkness swelling behind him. "Submit. Let the void in. It is so quiet. No more fear. No more loss." Mabel's knees buckled. She looked at Roken and Seren, seeing them dead in her mind's eye. She looked at Eddie, and the vision of him broken on the floor of the simulation room flashed before her. "Maybe," she whispered, "maybe it is better not to feel." "Hey, tall, dark, and ugly." The shout cut through the psychic pressure like a slap. Eddie marched past Mabel. He didn't have a weapon. He had a stun baton that was effectively a toothpick against a demigod and a medkit. But he walked with a swagger that was 100% fake and 100% necessary. Herofang stopped. He looked down at the human. "You speak to me, insect." "Yeah, I am speaking to you," Eddie said, planting his feet wide. "I just wanted to say your sales pitch needs work. Join me. I am empty inside and smell like old gym socks. Hard pass." "Eddie, stop!" Mabel gasped, reaching for him. "No, I will not stop." Eddie looked back at her, then pointed at Herofang. "He is in your head, Mabel. He is using your fear against you because he knows he can't beat you in a fair fight. Look at him, he is not a god. He is just a grumpy old ghost who couldn't handle the responsibility of caring about people." He turned back to the monster. "You say caring is weakness, buddy. You have no idea. You gave up everything because you were too scared to lose it. That is not strength. That is cowardice wrapped in a spooky metal suit." Herofang roared a sound that shook the catwalk. "You dare judge me, mortal?" "I judge you," Eddie said, his voice shaking but loud. "I judge you as a failure, Mabel is 10 times the warrior you ever were. Because she is terrified every single day and she still stands up. She still protects us. That is power. You are just void. Something snapped in Mabel. The fog in her eyes cleared. She looked at Eddie, this small, fragile human, standing between her and a nightmare insulting an ancient evil to buy her time. He was right. "Mabel," Eddie yelled. "Now would be a good time to hit him." Mabel let out a howl. It wasn't the polite noble cry of the court. It was a primal, feral sound of rage and reclamation. She launched herself forward. "Roken Seren, flank him," she ordered. The battle for the core erupted. Roken unleashed a torrent of fire from his cannon, forcing Herofang to raise a shield of darkness. Seren wove a web of psychic energy, trying to bind the monster's limbs. Mabel struck. She moved like quicksilver, her glaive clashing against the massive greatsword with sparks that flew like fireworks. She was faster, but he was stronger. Every blow from Herofang shook the entire platform. "Eddie! The stabilizing nodes!" Mabel shouted, as she ducked under a swing that sheared the top off a control console. "Use the sigil! We need to overcharge the core to burn him out!" Eddie sprinted toward the central console. He fumbled for the heart-forged sigil they had retrieved from the temple. It was glowing hot in his pouch. "Okay, magic space rock," Eddie muttered. "Do your thing." He slammed the sigil into the receiver slot. "Dr. Vallis said my heart restarted because of an external pace," he yelled over the noise of the battle. "Let's see if we can jumpstart a station." He hacked into the interface, his fingers flying over the holographic keys. He wasn't an engineer, but he knew biorhythms, and the heart forge was biological in nature. He treated the station like a dying patient. Inject adrenaline. Bypass the blockages. "Clear!" Eddie shouted, slamming his fist on the execute command. A pulse of golden light erupted from the core below. It washed over the platform. The hollow spawn trying to climb the sides screeched as they were incinerated. Herofang staggered. The light burned him. His armor hissed, the darkness receding. "Enough!" the monster roared. He slammed his sword into the ground. A shockwave of purple energy knocked Roken and Seren off their feet, sending them sliding to the edge of the abyss. Mabel was left alone in front of him. She lunged, aiming for his chest, but she was tired. Her strike was a fraction of a second too slow. Herofang caught the shaft of her glaive in one gauntleted hand. He snapped the weapon in two. Mabel gasped, staring at the broken pieces of her ancestral weapon. Herofang backhanded her. The blow sent her crashing into the railing near Eddie. Her helmet flew off, clattering away into the dark. Blood trickled from her mouth. She tried to rise, but her armor was locked up, damaged by the impact. "It ends," Herofang said. He raised the greatsword. The tip pointed directly at Mabel's heart. "The line of the silver howl dies with you." Time seemed to slow down. Eddie looked at Mabel. She was looking at him. Her golden eyes were wide, filled with an apology. She can't move, Eddie realized. She is going to die. The thought was unacceptable. It was a violation of the laws of his universe. Eddie looked at the distance. 10 feet. He looked at the sword coming down. He didn't think about Sarah, the girl he couldn't save. He didn't think about his fragility. He didn't think at all. He moved. No. Eddie threw himself across the gap. He didn't try to tackle Herofang. He didn't try to block the sword with his arm. He threw his entire body over Mabel's, shielding her with his own flesh and bone. The greatsword did not stop. The sound was wet and terrible. The blade, wreathed in void energy, pierced through Eddie's back and erupted out of his chest. It stopped inches from Mabel's face. The world went silent. Mabel stared. She saw the black blade. She saw the blood-red human blood spattering onto her silver breastplate. She looked up. Eddie's face was inches from hers. His eyes were wide, surprised. "Eddie," she whispered. He coughed. Blood coated his lips. He tried to smile. "Told you," he wheezed, his voice bubbling. "I'm the shield." Herofang ripped the sword free. Eddie's body jerked. He collapsed onto Mabel, his head resting on her shoulder. Pathetic, Herofang spat. A waste of life. Mabel didn't hear him. She couldn't hear the battle. She couldn't hear the alarms. All she could hear was the silence where Eddie's heartbeat should have been. She felt his weight on her. He was warm, but rapidly cooling. The void energy from the blade was eating at the wound, preventing healing. He was gone. "No," Mabel whispered. "No, no, no," she clutched him. And then a scream tore its way out of her throat. It wasn't human. It wasn't civilized. It was the howl of a wolf whose mate had been torn from her side. "You don't take him." She looked at the Heartforge. The golden light was pulsing chaotic. She remembered the old laws. The laws her grandfather had broken, but also the laws he had twisted. A life for a life. A soul anchor. "Rokan, cover me!" she screamed, her voice breaking into a sob. She didn't reach for a weapon. She reached for the latches of her armor. With frantic, trembling hands, she unlocked her chest plate. The heavy, silver slab came loose. Herofang paused, confused. "What are you doing? Surrendering?" Mabel ignored him. She rolled Eddie onto his back. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. The hole in his chest was a void of its own. "Stay with me," she commanded, her tears falling onto his face. "You stubborn idiot, you stay with me." She took the chest plate. The side that had faced her skin, the side where she had secretly branded his name, was glowing with a faint, residual heat from her own body and the energy of the battle. She pressed the metal directly onto Eddie's bare, ruined chest. She pressed it down hard, right over his stopped heart. "What is this sorcery?" Herofang stepped forward, raising his sword again. Mabel ignored the blade above her head. She placed both hands on the armor, pouring every ounce of her will, every ounce of her love and desperation into the metal. She spoke the words of the binding, the forbidden liturgy of the high houses. "When my name lies upon your heart," she chanted, her voice, rising with the power of the core, "your heart shall not belong to the void. I claim this soul, I bind it to the silver. My blood is your blood, my breath is your breath." Beneath the armor, where the branded name, EDDIE, touched his skin, a reaction occurred. The Heartforge sigil in the console screamed in resonance. The light in the chamber shifted from gold to a blinding, searing silver. The name on the armor began to burn. It glowed white-hot, cauterizing the wound, searing the flesh. Herofang swung his sword, but the blade never connected. A pillar of pure, solid light erupted from Eddie's chest. It blasted upward, knocking the greatsword from Herofang's grip. It slammed into the ancient wolf lord, lifting him off his feet and pinning him against the far wall of the chamber. "Impossible!" Herofang shrieked, as the light burned his void flesh. "A human cannot hold the anchor." "He is not just a human," Mabel screamed, standing up. She didn't have her armor. She didn't have a weapon. She stood over Eddie's body, her hands glowing with the same silver light. "He is my pack," the Heartforge responded to her declaration. The entire station groaned. The energy that Eddie had jump-started earlier flooded back into the chamber, channeled through the bond Mabel had just forged. The light became a physical force. It battered Herofang, stripping away the shadows, cracking his ancient iron armor. "I will return," the spirit roared, realizing he could not stand against the station's awakened fury. "The void is eternal." With a final, hateful glare, Herofang dissolved into a cloud of smoke, shooting up through the ventilation shaft, fleeing the cleansing light. The hollow spawn throughout the chamber shrieked and disintegrated, their connection to their master severed. Silence crashed back into the room. The light faded. Mabel dropped to her knees beside Eddie. The chest plate was fused to him now. The silver metal had melted slightly around the edges, sealing the terrible wound in his chest. "Eddie," she whispered. She pressed her ear to the armor. Silence. "No," she sobbed. "The oath, it should have worked. I gave you my name. I gave you my heart." Rokan and Seren limped over. Roken looked at the body, his stone face crumbling in grief. Seren fell to her knees, her sensing aura flickering out. "He is gone, Mabel," Seren whispered. "The damage was absolute." "He is not gone," Mabel snarled. She pounded her fist on the floor. "He is stubborn. He does not just leave." She grabbed his shoulders and shook him. "Wake up, that is an order. Wake up, damn you." There was no response. The medical bay was quiet, save for the hum of the stasis field. Eddie lay inside the glass cylinder. He looked peaceful, except for the massive piece of Luparian silver armor fused to his chest. The doctors had tried to remove it, but they couldn't. It was molecularly bonded to his skin and bone. Mabel sat in a chair beside the pod. She had refused to leave. She wore a spare flight suit. Her own armor was incomplete without the chest piece. She looked smaller without the metal, but her eyes were hard dry and haunted. Dr. Vallis stood by the monitor. She looked exhausted. "We have done everything," Vallis said softly. "The biostabilizer is running. The stasis field is preserving his brain function. But his heart is not beating, Mabel. It is just vibrating, like it is waiting for a signal that isn't coming." Mabel didn't look at the doctor. She looked at Eddie's hand resting on the white sheet inside the glass. "It will come," Mabel said. Her voice was a rasp. "Mabel." "He saved me," Mabel said. She raised her hand and placed it on the glass directly over where the chest plate rested on him. "He took the blow meant for me. He proved Herofang wrong. He proved that love is not a weakness." She leaned her forehead against the cool glass. "I never told him," she whispered. "I never told him what the brand meant. I never told him that I—" She stopped. She couldn't say it. Not while he was like this. "If you wake up," she murmured to the sleeping man, "I will tell you everything. I will tell you about the visions. I will tell you why I smell burnt iron every time you're near. Just come back." On the monitor behind Dr. Vallis, a flat green line stretched across the screen. Then there was a glitch. A tiny, almost imperceptible spike. Beep. It was faint. It was weak. But it was there. Mabel's head snapped up. "Doctor," she said, her breath hitching. Vallis looked at the screen. She frowned, tapping the console. "That shouldn't be possible. His heart tissue is 90% scar." Beep. Stronger this time. Inside the stasis pod, beneath the silver armor, a soft glow began to pulse. It wasn't the red of human blood. It was the pale starlight silver of the heart forge. Beep. Mabel stood up, her hand pressing harder against the glass. "Come on, Eddie," she commanded, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "Be stubborn." The monitor spiked again. A rhythm began to form. Uneven, struggling but fighting. It was the sound of a heart that refused to accept the authority of death. And mixed within that rhythm, if one listened very closely, was the faint answering howl of a wolf. The silence was the first thing Eddie noticed. It was not the terrifying vacuum silence of the void, nor the ringing silence that follows an explosion. It was a heavy, sterile silence broken only by the rhythmic hiss-click of a respirator and the steady, low-frequency thrum of a biomonitor. He felt heavy. His body felt like it had been disassembled, dipped in lead, and then put back together by an instruction manual that was missing a few pages. He opened his eyes. The light was dim, filtered through the translucent walls of a recovery pod. He blinked, trying to scrape the grit of unconsciousness from his mind. He was alive. That was a surprise. The last thing he remembered was the cold blade of Herofang's greatsword, the smell of ozone, and Mabel's face. He remembered the look in her golden eyes, a terror so raw it had hurt more than the sword. He tried to sit up, but a sharp, burning sensation in the center of his chest pinned him back down. It didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a heat source, a small furnace banking coals beneath his ribs. He turned his head to the side. Sitting in a cramped metal chair beside the pod was Mabel. She was asleep. It was the first time he had ever seen her unguarded. She was still wearing her armor, the greaves, the gauntlets, the pauldrons, but the heavy chest plate was missing. Without it, the dark gray undersuit revealed the rise and fall of her breathing. Her head was tipped forward, resting on her chest, her arms crossed defensively, even in slumber. Her white ears were flattened slightly, and her face, usually a mask of aristocratic disdain or warrior focus, looked impossibly young and exhausted. Eddie watched her for a long moment. He wanted to memorize the way the harsh medical lights softened on her fur. "Hey," he croaked. His voice sounded like he had swallowed a handful of gravel. Mabel did not stir. He tried again, forcing air through his dry throat. "Hey, Sleeping Beauty." Mabel's ears twitched. Instantly, her eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess, no slow waking. 1 second, she was asleep. The next, she was alert, her golden eyes locking onto his face with laser focus. She stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You are awake," she said. Her voice was tight, controlled, but there was a tremor in it that she couldn't quite hide. "Yeah," Eddie wheezed, managing a weak, lopsided grin. "I think so, unless this is the afterlife. If it is, the decor is terrible. Too much beige." Mabel let out a breath that was half sigh, half growl. She stepped closer to the pod, her hand hovering over the control panel, as if she wanted to open it, but wasn't sure if she was allowed to. "You look terrible," Eddie whispered. "Who sleeps in full, high-end metal cosplay like that? You are going to give yourself a back problem." "It is not cosplay," Mabel snapped, though the corner of her mouth quirked upward. "It is readiness, and my back is reinforced by generations of genetic engineering. It does not have problems." "Right," Eddie said. "Superwolf spine. I forgot." He shifted, and the heat in his chest flared again. He winced, his hand moving instinctively to his sternum. He expected to feel bandages or the thick gel of a Bacta-patch. Instead, he felt skin, but it felt different, harder, warmer. "What happened?" Eddie asked, his voice dropping. "The sword, I felt it go through." "I was dead, Mabel." "I know I was." Mabel went rigid. She pulled her hand back from the glass. She looked away, focusing on a readout on the wall that showed his vitals. "You were clinically dead for 3 minutes and 40 seconds, she said, reciting the numbers like a report. "The blade missed your spine but severed the aorta and destroyed the left ventricle. Massive trauma. Massive void corruption." "So how am I talking to you?" Eddie asked. "Did you find a spare heart lying around in the lost and found—" "Something like that," Mabel murmured. She turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "The Heartforge core. When you jumped in front of me, we were close to the energy stream. We used the biostabilizer and the residual energy from the sigil to cauterize the wound." "Cauterize?" Eddie raised an eyebrow. "That feels like an understatement. It feels like I have a fusion reactor installed in my ribcage." "The energy was compatible," Mabel said vaguely. She refused to meet his eyes. "The doctors say your heart has been reconstructed with a mix of your own tissue and Heartforge radiation. It is stable." The door to the recovery room slid open with a soft hiss. Dr. Vallis walked in, carrying a data pad. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her lab coat was wrinkled, and there was a smudge of soot on her cheek. "Ah, the miracle patient is awake," Dr. Vallis said, her tone professional but weary. "I see you are bothering Lady Mabel already. That is a good sign of neurological recovery." "Doctor," Eddie nodded. "Just asking how I am alive. Mabel is being cryptic." "Cryptic is her species' default setting," Dr. Vallis said, checking the monitors. "But honestly, Eddie, I cannot give you a much better answer. Biologically, you should be dead. When Lady Mabel brought you in, the wound was already sealed. There is a layer of, I don't even know what to call it, organic metal. It has fused with your sternum and your heart tissue. It is pumping blood, but it is also generating a low-level energy field." Eddie looked at Mabel. "Organic metal." Mabel adjusted her gauntlets, staring studiously at the floor. "The Heartforge has strange properties." "It saved your life," Dr. Vallis said, tapping the screen. "But here is the odd part. Your heart rate. Listen." She pressed a button on the console. The audio feed from the biomonitor filled the room. Thump, 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 thump. It was strong, steady. But there was an echo. A faint secondary beat that shadowed the first, perfectly synchronized but distinct. Thump, thump, thump. "It is a dual rhythm," Dr. Vallis explained. "Like your heart is beating in time with an external signal. We scanned the station for interference, but we couldn't find a source. It is just you." Eddie listened to the sound. It didn't sound like interference. It sounded like company. He looked at Mabel. She was standing very still, her breathing perfectly matching the rhythm coming from the speakers. In, out, thump, thump. "Weird," Eddie whispered. "As long as it pumps blood, I am not complaining," Dr. Vallis said, switching off the audio. "Now I need to run some cognitive tests. Lady Mabel, I must ask you to wait outside." Mabel hesitated. She looked at Eddie, a flicker of panic in her eyes, as if leaving him alone would cause his heart to stop again. "It is okay," Eddie said softly. "I am not going anywhere. I am too stubborn, remember." Mabel nodded once sharp and military. "I will be in the corridor. Do not die while I am gone. It would be extremely rude." She turned and marched out, her boots clanking heavily on the deck. 2 days later, the Spire was still burning. Not with the chaotic fire of battle, but with the controlled burns of welding torches and plasma cutters. The attack had been repelled, but the cost had been high. Sector 4 was a twisted wreck of metal. The hydroponics bay had been vented to space. The casualty list was scrolling on the public screens in the central plaza, a long ribbon of names that seemed to never end. Eddie sat on a crate near the edge of the plaza, watching the reconstruction crews. He was dressed in a fresh uniform that hung a little loose on his frame. His chest was heavily bandaged, and he leaned on a makeshift cane made from a piece of hydraulic piping. He wasn't supposed to be here. Dr. Vallis had ordered strictly bed rest and zero exertion. But the silence of the med bay had started to scream at him. He needed to see that the world was still turning. "Lift on 3, a foreman shouted nearby. 1, 2, 3. A team of Stonekin and humans heaved a massive steel girder off a trapped transport vehicle. Eddie watched them, his fingers twitching. He wanted to help. He wanted to grab a corner and pull. But he knew his new heart, however strong it sounded, might not appreciate the strain just yet. "You look like a gargoyle who has lost his cathedral," a voice rumbled. Eddie looked up. Roken stood there, his rocky skin chipped and scarred from the battle. He was holding a canister of water. "Just supervising Roken," Eddie said. "Making sure your rocks don't drop anything on your toes." Roken sat down on the ground, which shook slightly under his weight, and handed the water to Eddie. "You should be in the back to tank." "I am fine," Eddie took a sip. "How is the fleet?" "Decimated," Rokan said grimly. "We lost 60% of the interceptors. The Fang of Ruin took a heavy toll before the station's defenses reactivated. If you and Mabel hadn't kick-started the core well, we would all be floating ice cubes right now." "It was mostly Mabel," Eddie said. "I just acted as the jumper cables." "Do not diminish your deed, human." Roken's voice was serious. "I saw what you did. You stood before a Void Lord with a stick. That is not something a weak species does." Eddie rubbed his chest. The heat was there, a comforting weight. "Yeah, well, stupid is as stupid does." "Mabel is looking for you," Roken said. "She is agitated." "She is always agitated," Eddie smiled. "Not like this," Roken said. "She is prowling, like a wolf who smells a storm. You should go to her." Eddie nodded and used the cane to leverage himself up. "Where is she?" "Sector 9, Rokan pointed. "Helping with the triage of the refugees." Eddie made his way through the damaged corridors. The air smelled of ozone and ozone scrubbers. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs of unity. A Thalorian sharing energy with a drained android. A human mechanic welding a plate onto a Luparian's armor. The attack had almost destroyed them, but it had also fused them together. He found Mabel in a makeshift medical tent set up in a cargo bay. She wasn't commanding. She was kneeling on the floor, holding the hand of a young Thalorian girl, while a medic stitched a wound on the child's leg. Mabel's armor was dented, covered in soot, but she looked regal. She was speaking softly to the child, her voice a low rumble that seemed to calm the girl's tears. Eddie watched from the entrance, a lump forming in his throat. This was the woman who claimed she was cold. This was the monster's granddaughter. Mabel sensed him. She didn't turn, but her ears swiveled toward him. She finished soothing. The child stood up and walked over to him. "You are disobeying medical orders," she said, crossing her arms. "I am engaging in physical therapy," Eddie countered. "Walking is good for the circulation. Besides, I heard you were prowling." "I do not prowl," Mabel huffed. "I patrol. There is a difference." She looked him over her eyes, scanning the bandages peeking out from his collar. "Are you in pain?" "A little," Eddie admitted. "It feels hot, like I swallowed a star." "Come," she said abruptly. "The noise here is excessive. I need to check the dressing." She led him to a small supply alcove, away from the main bustle. It was quiet here, stacked high with crates of ration bars and blankets. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to a crate. Eddie sat. "You know Dr. Vallis changed the bandages this morning. I am pretty sure they are fine." "Dr. Vallis is competent, but she does not understand the nature of the wound," Mabel said. She stepped between his legs, her armor clinking softly. "Unbutton your shirt." Eddie fumbled with the buttons. His hands were a little shaky. Mabel watched him with impatience, then brushed his hands away. "You are too slow," she muttered. Her claws, sharp and deadly, hooked the fabric and undid the buttons with surprising delicacy. She parted the shirt. Eddie looked down. The scar was not a normal scar. It was a starburst of silver, branching out across his chest like lightning frozen in metal. The skin around it was pink and healthy, but the center looked like polished chrome. Mabel inhaled sharply. She reached out her hand, hovering over the silver mark. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. "Only when I laugh," Eddie said weakly. She touched it. The moment her skin made contact with the silver scar, a shockwave went through Eddie. It wasn't painful. It was electric. Thump, thump. The sound in his ears was deafening. He felt his heart contract, and at the exact same moment, he felt Mabel's heart beat. He didn't just hear it. He felt it, a phantom sensation in his own chest, as if he had two hearts beating in perfect unison. Mabel gasped. Her golden eyes dilated. She felt it too. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the two of them. The smell of her iron pine and something uniquely her filled his senses. He could feel her fear, her relief, and a deep, overwhelming protectiveness that washed over him like a tide. "Whoa," Eddie breathed. "Okay, that is new." Mabel didn't pull away. Her hand was pressed flat against his chest, her palm absorbing the rhythm. "It is synchronized," she murmured. Eddie looked up at her. Her face was inches from his. He could see the flecks of amber in her gold eyes. "You saved me," Eddie said softly. "Whatever you did, you gave me something of yours, didn't you? That is why it feels like this." Mabel's gaze dropped to his lips, then back to his eyes. She looked terrified, not of battle, but of the truth. "I did what was necessary," she said, her voice trembling. "I stabilized the biological failure." "Mabel," Eddie reached up and covered her hand with his. His hand looked small and fragile over her armored gauntlet, but he held on tight. "If you ever want to borrow it back, you know, for safekeeping, just let me know." Mabel froze. A mixture of sorrow and longing crossed her face. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You already gave it. There is nothing left to borrow." The air between them was thick with unsaid words. Eddie wanted to ask her what she meant. He wanted to ask about the vision of the gray wolf. He wanted to kiss her. But the comms unit on Mabel's belt beeped, shattering the moment. "Lady Mabel," Seren's voice came through urgent and clear. "You need to come to the command deck. We have tracked the energy signature. It is him." Mabel pulled her hand away as if burned. She stepped back, the mask of the commander slamming back into place. "On my way," she said into the comms. She looked at Eddie. "Button your shirt. We have work to do." The strategic hologram table in the command center flickered with static. Roken, Saren, Mabel, and a hastily dressed Eddie stood around it. "He is not dead," Saren said, pointing to a red pulse moving away from the station on the star chart. "Herofang. His physical form was destroyed by the light, but his essence, his void soul, it survived. He has possessed the Fang of Ruin's navigation computer." "He is a ghost in the machine," Rokan grunted. "And he has the shard," Mabel said, her fists clenched on the table. "He managed to steal a fragment of the heart-forged sigil before he fled. It is small, but it is enough." "Enough for what?" Eddie asked. "To open the final gate," Mabel said. She tapped a location on the map, a remote dead system on the edge of the galaxy. "The Temple of the Silent Howl. It is the graveyard of the First Luparian Crusade. It is where the Hollow Maw was originally sealed 5,000 years ago." "If he brings the sigil there," Seren continued, "he can invert the seal. He won't just open a door for the hollow spawn. He will turn the entire galaxy inside out. The void will swallow everything." "How long do we have?" Eddie asked. "Calculations suggest he will reach the temple in 48 standard hours," Seren said. "We have to intercept him," Mabel said instantly. "The fleet is crippled. The capital ships are too slow." "We cannot send an army," Roken agreed. "He would see us coming and unleash the spawn. We need a strike team, small, fast. Something that can slip through his sensors." "I will go," Mabel said. "This is my burden. My ancestor started this, I must finish it." "You are not going alone," Eddie said. Mabel turned on him. "You are injured. You are barely standing." "I am standing fine," Eddie argued. "And apparently I am the only one who can tank a hit from a void sword and walk away with a cool scar. You need me." "It is too dangerous," Mabel shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "I almost lost you once. Do you think I can bear to watch it happen again?" The room went silent. Rokan and Seren looked at the floor, giving them privacy. Eddie softened his tone. He walked around the table and stood in front of her. "Mabel," he said gently, "you are scared. I get it. I am scared too. But look at the map. That temple is the place you fear most, isn't it? It is where your family's honor died." Mabel looked away, her jaw tight. "I am not letting you walk into your nightmare alone," Eddie said. "We are a pack. Remember you, me, the rock and the psychic. We go together, or we don't go at all." Mabel looked at Roken. The Stonekin nodded. "I am with the human." She looked at Seren. The Thalorian smiled. "My fate is tied to yours, Lady Mabel." Mabel looked back at Eddie. She saw the stubborn set of his jaw, the fire in his eyes that matched the new fire in his heart. She realized she couldn't stop him. Even if she locked him in a cell, he would probably chew through the door. "Fine," she whispered. "We take the Shadow Stalker. It is a prototype stealth corvette. We leave in 1 hour." 50 minutes later, Eddie was in the armory, looking for a replacement thermal pistol. The room was quiet, smelling of gun oil and cold metal. He walked past the workbench where Mabel usually maintained her gear. She was there, her back to him. She had the chest plate, the one she had worn during the battle, the one she had pressed against him clamped in a vise. She was working on it with a laser welder. "Hey," Eddie said. "Just grabbing some gear." Mabel jumped. She quickly threw a rag over the chest plate. "You should be at the launch bay," she said, her voice high. "I still have 10 minutes." Eddie walked closer. "Is that the armor, can I see?" I never got a good look at the thing that saved my life." "It is damaged," Mabel said quickly, blocking his path. "It is unsightly." "Mabel, I have seen insides of things that should stay inside," Eddie laughed. "A dented breastplate isn't going to scare me." He stepped around her. Mabel tried to grab his arm, but she was too late. He lifted the rag. The chest plate was scorched black on the outside, but it was the inside that caught his eye. The metal was warped as if it had been subjected to intense heat from within. But amidst the warping, there were lines. Deep, deliberate carvings. They looked like letters, but in a language he didn't know. Sharp, angular runes. He leaned in. A scent hit him. It was faint but unmistakable. It was the smell of burnt iron and fur. The same smell he had hallucinated when he was dying. The smell of the gray wolf in his vision. The brand. His heart, his new, loud, silver-laced heart, gave a massive thump. He looked at the carving. Then he looked at his own chest, rubbing the fabric of his shirt over the scar. The shape of the scar, it matched the pattern of the runes. He looked at Mabel. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the wall, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She looked like a prisoner, waiting for the verdict. "Mabel," Eddie said, his voice trembling. "What is this?" "It is structural reinforcement," she said, her voice hollow. "To distribute the kinetic impact." "Don't lie to me," Eddie said. "I can feel it. When I look at this, my chest burns." "What did you do?" Mabel closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. "It is an old technique," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "From the age of myth. We used to believe that if you marked your armor with the name of the thing you valued most, it would give you strength." "The thing you valued most," Eddie repeated. He looked at the runes again. He didn't need to read Luparian to know what it said. EDDIE. She had walked into battle with his name pressed against her heart. Long before he saved her. Long before the explosion. "Why?" Eddie asked. Mabel turned to him. Her eyes were wet. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Because every time we went out I was terrified you wouldn't come back. And I thought if I kept your name close, the void wouldn't be able to find you. It was superstitious. It was foolish." "It worked," Eddie said. He reached out and touched her arm. "Mabel, it worked." "We have to go." Mabel pulled away gently, wiping her eyes. "The mission. We cannot be late." She grabbed the chest plate, unclamped it, and hurriedly strapped it onto her undersuit. She locked the clasps with a definitive click, hiding the name, hiding the secret once more against her skin. "When we get back," Eddie said to her back. "When will we survive this? I want the whole story. No more myths. No more structural reinforcement. I want to know about the gray wolf I saw in my vision. And I want to know why my heart beats in time with yours." Mabel paused at the door. She didn't turn around, but her posture softened. "If we survive," she said, her voice steadying, "I will tell you everything. I promise." She walked out. Eddie stood there for a second, his hand over his heart. He could feel it beating. Thump, thump. And in the distance he could feel hers answering. He grabbed the thermal pistol and holstered it. "Okay," he whispered to the empty room. "Let's go save the galaxy. Again." The Shadowstalker was a sleek black needle of a ship designed to slip through sensor nets, like a phantom. It sat on the private launch pad, its engines humming with a low, predatory growl. Roken was already in the pilot's seat. Seren was manning the sensor suite. Eddie walked up the ramp, Mabel right beside him. They moved in step, their strides matching perfectly, without conscious thought. As they strapped into the crash seats, the view screen showed the stars cold, distant, and indifferent. But somewhere out there, a monster was waiting to turn off the lights. "Systems green," Roken reported. "Stealth drive engaged." "Course set for the Temple of the Silent Howl," Seren said. Mabel looked at Eddie across the narrow aisle. "Ready?" she asked. Eddie checked his harness. He checked his medkit. He checked his heart. "Ready," he said. "Let's go show your grandfather that he messed with the wrong pack." The thrusters fired, and the ship shot forward, vanishing into the black. Behind them, Haven Spire grew smaller, a beacon of light in the darkness. Ahead of them lay the truth, the past, and the final test of a bond that had been forged in fire and carved in metal. The Shadow Stalker touched down on the landing platform of the Temple of the Silent Howl, with a grace that belied the tension inside the cockpit. The landing struts hissed as they made contact with the ancient stone, kicking up clouds of dust that had not been disturbed for 5,000 years. The temple was not merely a building. It was a mausoleum of history, a monolith of gray stone and black metal, floating in the dead space between star systems. It was vast, dwarfing their sleek corvette, its spires reaching up like clawed fingers, trying to scratch the indifferent face of the cosmos. "Atmosphere is thin but breathable," Seren reported, her voice hushed, as if she were afraid of waking the ghosts that surely resided here. "Gravity is at 0.8 standard." "Shields are holding," Roken rumbled from the pilot's seat. "But the sensors are blind. The void radiation from the core is scrambling everything. We are flying by eyesight and instinct now." Mabel stood up. She checked the straps of her armor, specifically the chest plate that hid her secret. Her face was pale, the golden eyes dim. She looked like someone walking to her own execution. "Hey," Eddie said. He was checking the charge on his thermal pistol, but he stopped and walked over to her. "You okay?" "This place," Mabel whispered. "It smells of failure. My house's failure." "Then let's renovate," Eddie said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I have always wanted to redecorate an ancient doom temple. Maybe add some potted plants. A rug." Mabel looked at him, and for a second, the heavy weight on her shoulders seemed to lift just a millimeter. "You are impossible." "I am stubborn," Eddie corrected. "Let's go." They descended the ramp into the crushing silence of the temple. The air was cold, biting at their exposed skin. The entrance hall was a cavernous expanse, lined with statues that towered 50 feet high. Eddie shined his flashlight up at them, and his breath hitched. The statues were not just of Luparians. On the left, a wolf warrior in archaic armor stood with a glaive raised. On the right, standing shoulder to shoulder with the wolf, was a human. The human figure wore bulky, primitive pressure gear and held a projectile rifle, but the stance was unmistakable. They were partners. They were a pack. "I thought humans were new to the galactic stage," Eddie murmured, sweeping his light over the stone human's face. It looked determined, defiant. "History is often written by those who wish to forget," Mabel said softly. She walked up to the base of the wolf statue and placed her hand on the cold stone. "The First Alliance. Before the Great Silence. Before the houses decided that isolation was strength." "So," Eddie said, looking between the two statues, "we have done this before, you and me. Or at least your kind and mine." "Perhaps," Mabel said. She pulled her hand away. "Come. The inner sanctum is this way." As they ventured deeper, the architecture changed. The clean lines of the entrance gave way to twisted organic shapes, corruption bleeding into the stone. The void was here. It pulsed in the walls, a low, thrumming heartbeat that sounded like a headache felt. Seren stopped suddenly, clutching her head. "The cracks are wide here. I can hear them screaming. The spirits that were consumed." Roken moved to support her, his massive stone presence a comfort in the shifting dark. "Block it out, little Violet. Focus on my voice. I am solid. I am here." Mabel was walking ahead, but her steps were faltering. She was shaking. The memories of her ancestor, the genetic memory encoded in her blood, were assaulting her. She could see the phantom images of the battle that had happened here millennia ago. She could see the moment Herofang had broken. She felt a hand slide into hers. It was warm, calloused, small compared to her clawed gauntlet. She looked down. Eddie was walking beside her. He wasn't looking at her. He was scanning the shadows with his pistol raised, but his left hand was gripping hers tightly. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer a quip. He just held on. Mabel squeezed back. The trembling in her legs subsided. She drew a breath that smelled of ozone and ancient dust, and she kept moving. The heart-forged chamber of the Silent Howl was a dark mirror of the one on Haven Spire. Where the spire's core was gold and warm, this one was a swirling vortex of purple and black. In the center, standing on a dais of obsidian, was Herofang. The entity was stronger here. He was no longer a ghost in the machine. He had drawn mass from the temple itself, forming a body of jagged stone and liquid shadow. In his hand, he held the stolen fragment of the heart-forged sigil. It was being crushed its amber light, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching dark. "You are late," Herofang's voice boomed. It came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in their teeth. "Grandfather," Mabel said. She released Eddie's hand and stepped forward, drawing her glaive. "Put the sigil down. It is over." "Over," Herofang turned. His face was a featureless mask of void, save for two burning purple eyes. "It is just beginning. The seal is inverted. Once I crush this last ember of light, the gate will open. The maw will feed. And there will finally be peace." He looked past Mabel, his gaze landing on Eddie. The purple eyes narrowed. "And you brought the pet," Herofang sneered. "The human cattle." "He is not cattle," Mabel growled. "He is a warrior." "Is he?" Herofang laughed. It was a terrible wet sound. "Or is he just a possession, a thing you claimed because you were too weak to stand alone?" Herofang raised a hand. A beam of dark energy shot out, not to attack, but to illuminate. It hit Mabel's chest. The armor flared. The hidden brand beneath the metal, the name EDDIE, glowed with a harsh, revealing light. It shone through the silver, projecting the letters into the air like a hologram of shame. Eddie stared at it. He saw his name floating in the air, written in the sharp, aggressive script of the Luparian high houses. "Look at it, human," Herofang roared. "Do you know what that means in the old tongue? That is not a gesture of love. It is a brand of ownership. It says, 'This creature belongs to the Silver Howl. It lives by my will. It dies by my command.'" Herofang stepped closer, the shadows lengthening. "She did not save you. She leashed you. She wrote her name on your soul so that you could never leave her. You are not her partner. You are her thrall." Eddie felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He looked at the glowing letters. Then he looked at Mabel. Mabel wasn't looking at Herofang. She was looking at Eddie, her eyes wide with panic and guilt. She didn't deny it. "Mabel," Eddie asked, his voice quiet amidst the thrumming power of the room. "Is that true? Is that what the ritual does?" Mabel stammered. "I wanted to save you. I wanted to keep you." "To keep me," Eddie repeated. The words hung in the air, heavy and ambiguous. "See," Herofang gloated. "She admits it. You are a slave to her fear." "Enough talk," Roken shouted. "We are not here to debate semantics with a ghost." Roken opened fire. His rotary cannon unleashed a storm of kinetic rounds. Herofang waved a hand, and a wall of hollow spawn materialized from the floor, intercepting the bullets. "Kill them," Herofang commanded the spawn. "But leave the girl. I want her to watch her toy break." The battle exploded. Seren and Roken were instantly swarmed by the spawn creatures of shadow that moved like liquid smoke. Seren's barriers flared violet, holding back the tide, while Roken became a wrecking ball of stone and fury. Mabel hesitated. She looked at Eddie, shame burning in her eyes. "Don't look at me!" Eddie yelled, snapping out of his shock. He fired his thermal pistol, blowing the head off a spawn that was lunging for her. "Look at the bad guy. We can talk about my status as a piece of furniture later." Mabel let out a sharp breath. She nodded. She turned her shame into fuel. She launched herself at Herofang. It was a clash of titans. Silver light against void darkness. Mabel moved with a desperate speed, her glaive spinning, striking, parrying. But Herofang was powered by the temple itself. He absorbed her blows, his laughter echoing around the chamber. Eddie wasn't a titan. He was a medic with a pistol and a cane. He watched the fight. He saw Herofang's armor. It wasn't solid metal. It was a weave of void energy and physical matter, held together by nodes of corruption. "It is biological," Eddie muttered to himself. "Or close enough." He tapped his comms. "Seren, can you give me a boost? I need to get up to that dais." "I am a little busy," Seren, strained, holding back 3 spawn with a telekinetic grip. "But go," she lashed out with a wave of force, clearing a path for a split second. Eddie sprinted. He didn't run away from the danger. He ran toward the eye of the storm. He dodged a lash of shadow that would have cut him in half. He slid under a falling pillar. He reached the dais, just as Herofang caught Mabel by the throat and lifted her into the air. "Weak!" Herofang hissed, squeezing. Mabel clawed at his gauntlet, gasping. "Hey, ugly!" Eddie shouted. Herofang turned his head. "You again!" "Me again," Eddie said. He didn't shoot. He lunged forward and jammed his biostabilizer, the medical device he used to restart hearts, directly into a crack in Herofang's void armor. "Clear!" Eddie yelled. He triggered the device, but he had modified it. Instead of a stabilizing rhythm, he set it to a chaotic high-frequency arrhythmia pulse. The device discharged. A massive jolt of bioelectric energy surged into Herofang's form. The Void Lord shrieked. It wasn't pain. It was dissonance. The energy disrupted the frequency he used to hold his physical form together. His arm spasmed, dropping Mabel. "You bacteria!" Herofang roared, backhanding Eddie. The blow caught Eddie in the chest, right on the silver scar. He flew backward, hitting the stone floor hard. His vision swam. His new heart stuttered, then raced to catch up. Mabel hit the ground and rolled. She saw Eddie fall. "Eddie!" "I'm fine," Eddie wheezed, struggling to his knees. "I just gave him atrial fibrillation. He is unstable. Hit the nodes." Mabel understood. She didn't hesitate. She drove her glaive into the joint of Herofang's armor, where the energy was flickering. Herofang howled. The shadows around him began to boil. "You cannot defeat me," he screamed. "I am the temple." He slammed his fist into the central control pillar. The stolen Heartforged sigil shattered. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated void energy exploded outward. It knocked everyone flat. The room began to dissolve. The walls peeled away to reveal the infinite, hungry dark outside. "He has broken the anchor," Seren gasped, blood running from her nose. "The gate is opening." A rift began to tear open above the dais. A mouth, a maw. It was vast, silent, and terrified the mind just to look at it. The hollow maw was entering real space. "No," Mabel whispered. "We failed." Eddie looked at the rift. He looked at the energy swirling around it. It was sucking everything in. He looked at his chest. The silver brand was glowing so bright it was burning through his shirt. It was pulsing in time with the rift. "Resonance," Eddie mumbled. Dr. Vallis said resonance. He stood up. He swayed his cane, clattering to the floor. "Mabel," he said. His voice was calm. Mabel looked at him. "Eddie, what are you doing?" "The ritual," Eddie said. "You said it binds. It connects." He started walking toward the rift, toward the center of the energy storm where the shattered sigil lay. "Eddie, no, come back!" Mabel screamed. She tried to run to him, but the gravity of the rift pinned her to the floor. "If I am the anchor," Eddie shouted over the roar of the void, "then let's see what I can hold." He stepped into the circle of power. The energy hit him like a physical train. It tore at his clothes. It tore at his skin. But the silver armor bonded to his heart held. It acted as a lightning rod, drawing the chaotic energy of the opening gate into himself. "Close it," Eddie screamed. He grabbed the fragmented remains of the control mechanism. He poured every ounce of his bioenergy, every beat of his stolen silver heart into the system. His heart rate spiked. 200, 300, thump, 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 thump. And then silence. The overload was too much. For the second time in a week, Eddie's heart stopped. He fell. But he didn't hit the ground. He hung suspended in the white-hot center of the reaction, a silhouette against the blinding light. Darkness. Then a flicker. Eddie was standing in a field of tall blue grass. He was wearing chainmail made of rusted rings. He was bleeding. A wolf, a massive gray beast with intelligent eyes, stood over him, keeping the scavengers at bay. The wolf was dying a spear through its side. "Go," the wolf's mind voice spoke in his head. "Live human." "Not without you," Eddie, who was named Eric in this life, whispered. He took his knife. He carved a rune into the wolf's collar. "I bind you to me. Return." Flash. He was in a high-tech city of glass spires. He was a cyborg, wires trailing from his skull. He was holding the hand of a Luparian diplomat in a silk robe. An explosion rocked the building. "They are coming for me," the diplomat said. It was Mabel, or a version of her. "Let them come," the cyborg said. He uploaded his consciousness into her dataport. "I am the firewall. I hold the door." Flash. A desert planet. A starship bridge. A muddy trench. Again and again. 1,000 lives. 1,000 deaths. Sometimes she was the warrior, and he was the healer. Sometimes he was the soldier, and she was the queen. Sometimes they were enemies who refused to kill each other. But the pattern was always the same. One fell. The other carved a name. On armor. On a stone. On a microchip. On a tree. It wasn't slavery. It wasn't ownership. It was a lifeline. Eddie floated in the void of memory. He understood now. Herofang was wrong. The ritual wasn't about possessing someone. It was about refusing to let the universe erase them. It was the ultimate act of stubbornness. "Confront the void," a voice whispered, "with claws and with heart. We keep each other." He saw the current moment. He saw Mabel screaming his name. He saw the brand of ownership on his chest. It wasn't a brand. It was a promise. "Eddie." Mabel was crawling. She was dragging herself across the floor against the gravitational shear of the rift. Her armor was scraping against the stone sparks flying. She reached the edge of the circle. Eddie was floating there. His eyes closed his chest, silent. The rift was stabilizing, feeding off him, but it was consuming him in the process. "You stupid, stubborn human," Mabel sobbed. She ripped the gauntlet off her right hand. She reached into the energy field. It burned her fur, blistering her skin, but she didn't stop. She grabbed Eddie's ankle. She pulled. "I release you," she screamed. "I release the claim you are not mine to keep. Come back." She clawed at her own chest, ripping the undersuit, exposing her own skin. "I break the vow, do not die for me." In the silence of the energy storm, Eddie opened his eyes. They weren't brown anymore. They were silver. He looked down at Mabel. He saw her terror. He heard her trying to break the bond to save him. "No," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried perfectly. He floated down, landing softly in front of her. The energy of the rift swirled around him like a cloak, but it no longer hurt him. "You don't get to fire me," Eddie said. He knelt down. He took her burned hand in his. "I saw them, Mabel," he said. "The other lives. The blue grass. The glass city. I saw all of it." Mabel froze her tears, suspended in her eyes. "Did you see?" "Herofang said the mark means I belong to you," Eddie said. He placed his hand over the silver scar on his chest. "Maybe it does, but it works both ways." He leaned in his forehead, touching hers. "I choose it," Eddie whispered. "I accept the brand. I accept the pack. Not because of magic, not because of a ritual, but because I am too stubborn to let you go anywhere without me." He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle movie star kiss. It was desperate, messy, and filled with the energy of a dying star. And the universe snapped. The acceptance of the bond completed the circuit. The Heartforge energy didn't just stabilize, it evolved. A pulse of blinding white light exploded from them. It shot upward, straight into the maw of the opening rift. The hollow maw roared a sound of frustration and pain as the light slammed the door shut. The rift collapsed on itself. The darkness was scoured away by the brilliance of two souls, resonating in perfect voluntary unison. The light washed over Herofang. "No!" The void. Lord shrieked, shielding his eyes. "This power is impure. It is chaotic." "It is human," Eddie shouted, standing up and pulling Mabel with him. "And it is wolf. It is everything you were too afraid to be." The light hit Herofang. But it didn't burn him like fire. It washed over him like water. It stripped away the void corruption. It stripped away the anger. For a moment beneath the monster, they saw the face of an old, tired wolf. He looked at Mabel. He looked at Eddie. "The pack," the spirit whispered. "I forgot." And then he was gone. He didn't explode. He simply faded, dissolving into motes of light that drifted upward into the ceiling. The temple shook one last time, settling into its foundations. The purple glow faded, replaced by the warm, amber hum of a stabilized Heartforge. Silence returned. But this time, it was peaceful. Eddie looked at Mabel. The silver light in his eyes faded back to warm brown. He grinned, then immediately winced, clutching his chest. "Okay," he groaned. "That definitely counts as cardio." Mabel stared at him. Then she let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his neck. "You are the worst," she mumbled into his skin. "The absolute worst." "I know," Eddie said, holding her tight. "Pack for life." "Pack for eternity," Mabel corrected. 3 months later. Haven Spire was unrecognizable. The scars of the battle were still there, but they had been incorporated into the new design. The fortress was no longer just a military outpost. It was a beacon. Ships from dozens of species were docked at the pylons. The Heartforge core was open, no longer a guarded secret of the Luparian houses, but a place where anyone could come to pledge oaths of alliance. On the observation deck, looking out at the nebula, stood 2 figures. Mabel wore a new set of ceremonial armor. It was polished to a mirror sheen. But she wasn't wearing her helmet. She stood tall, her white fur catching the light of the stars. Eddie stood beside her. He looked healthier, the shadows under his eyes gone. He wore a standard flight suit, but over it, he wore a single piece of Luparian armor, a chest plate. It was custom-made, sleek, fitted, and gleaming silver. "It fits well," Mabel noted, adjusting the strap on his shoulder. "It is a little tight around the lats," Eddie complained, though he was grinning. "I think you measured wrong." "I measured perfectly," Mabel said. "You have simply been eating too many ration bars." She tapped the center of his chest plate. There, engraved into the metal in elegant flowing Luparian script, was a name. Mabel. "I still think the font is a bit much," Eddie said, looking down at it. "It looks like a wedding invitation." "It is the script of high royalty," Mabel sniffed. "It is dignified." "If we do this again in the next life," Eddie said, leaning against the railing. "Can I pick the font? I am thinking something bold. Sans serif. Maybe Comic Sans, just to annoy the historians." Mabel actually laughed. It was a rare, beautiful sound like wind chimes in a storm. "If you use Comic Sans, I will leave you in the void," she threatened. "No, you won't," Eddie said. He looked at her. "You will carve my name on a rock and come drag me back, just like always." Mabel looked at him. Her golden eyes were soft, filled with a warmth that could melt a glacier. "Just like always," she agreed. She reached out and took his hand. Her claws were sheathed, her touch gentle. "The fleet reports the Hollow Maw has retreated to the outer rim," she said. "They are quiet, for now." They will be back, Eddie said. Or something else will. Yes, Mabel nodded. She looked out at the infinite expanse of stars, vast and dark and full of terrors. Scared? Eddie asked. Mabel squeezed his hand. She felt the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart, a heart that beat in perfect time with her own. Thump, thump. No, she said. We have a pack, Eddie smiled. Then let's go get some lunch. I heard the cafeteria is serving that meat goop again. I want to see if I can get Rokan to eat a vegetable. They turned and walked away from the window, shoulder to shoulder. They were a wolf and a human, a noble and a scavenger bound not by chains, but by a choice made over and over again across 1,000 lifetimes. The universe was big and it was cold, but as long as they had each other, they were unbreakable.